Richie, we'll call the meeting to order. Richie, can you perform your magic and we'll respond by roll call?
I will do that. And there might be some hope that this is the last time I have to read a preamble for this group. In any event, in accordance with the county's continuity of government ordinance and Virginia Code section 15.2-1413, this meeting is being held electronically over the Zoom platform. The authority directors are not physically present at a single central location. Rather, they are participating electronically. The public has real-time audiovisual access to this meeting over Zoom and real-time audio access over telephone. The public's also invited to comment during the meeting's public comment period. Comments are limited to 3 minutes. Anyone interested in commenting should use the raise hand feature on Zoom. If you're listening by telephone, please use the *9 feature to notify the facilitator. All speakers must identify themselves and the magisterial district where they live or have a business. This meeting is being recorded and it will be made available on the county's website. And with that, we will call the roll and ask each director to identify their general location. And I'll start with the chairman, Mr. Fennell.
I am here at my home in the Whitehall Magisterial District in Free Union.
Mr. Taylor.
He is not going to be here.
Ms. Buttrick.
I'm here. I'm in the Forestry Department office, and I'm a denizen of Whitehall normally.
Dr. Moses.
Here in the North Garden.
Mr. Emmett.
Here in my office in Charlottesville.
Let's see, John Moore, Mr. Moore.
Yeah, I'm at my residence in Samuel Miller District. Yeah.
Rose Emery, Miss Emery.
Present in Free Union.
And Sharon Merrick, Miss Merrick.
Hi, home office in Ravenna District.
Okay. All right, Mr. Chair, with that, we do have a quorum present, so we can proceed.
Excellent. First order of business. Doesn't seem like there are other matters listed, so approval of minutes.
I move we approve the minutes.
I'll second.
Excellent. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Roll call, Richie?
No, we can do it by voice vote with those in favor and those opposed.
Okay, those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Very good. Thank you.
All right, Scott. Margaret's farm donation proposal.
Thank you. All right. All right. Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Great. Thank you. All right. So yes, we have two easement donation proposals on the agenda for today. The first is St. Margaret's Farm, owned by the Gagne family. This is 73 acres on Louisa Road. Here's a map of the property. You can see that it's two parcels. The larger parcel is where the dwellings are. The northeastern smaller parcel is mostly just open space and floodplain. And you can see here we're in the Southwest Mountains Rural Historic District. This is a more recent oblique aerial of the property to show the current conditions. Alrighty, so the resources to be protected. There are about 16 acres of 100-year floodplain on this property, which would be protected from development. The property includes 47 acres of important agricultural soils. It's located on Louisa Road, which is an entrance corridor. And there is a setback to help protect that scenic road. And the property, as mentioned, is within the Southwest Mountains Rural Historic District. And just the proposed terms. There would be no subdivisions, 2 parcels to remain as a single property. There are 2 existing dwellings that could remain or be replaced, but no new dwellings. There's a 500-foot structure setback from Louisa Road and a 35-foot riparian buffer on Turkey Sag Creek, which is, if you can see my pointer, here on the boundary between the 2 parcels. Was that my time limit for speaking?
Never.
I did go on too long. All right. So those are the proposed terms and the resource to be protected. Staff would recommend that the authority accept this donation, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Seems pretty straightforward.
Is there a lawyer involved?
I don't believe they've selected a lawyer yet.
Okay, I'm just noticing there aren't any building envelopes.
There's just the setbacks. No, they haven't proposed any envelopes.
But they're not proposing any new buildings either. They're just replacing. Is there any language in there that says that the replaced dwellings have to be sort of where they already are? That might suffice.
Yeah, well, we could certainly do that. This proposal has been around since before that entire issue came up. Mm-hmm. So it only recently got reactivated, and that didn't come up in the discussion. So
Scott, I had a note on that, and in my papers was, were we going to limit replacement to the site of the buildings at this point? And I think that sounds wise to do.
Yeah.
I agree.
Either that, or I just think it would be a good idea if they do have counsel at some point before they actually, before we draft the easement for them or something. And that,
no, they know they need to, and I've told them that once the authority acts, they'll need to have an attorney draw up their deed for them, so they're aware of that.
Well, if we can just make part of our action that we say to them that they should at least discuss whether or not they think they want building envelopes in light of some of the recent court cases.
Right.
Just to make sure that they're aware that it's a thing,
Right.
Can I ask, I'd like to ask a related question. What if they come back with building envelopes that are nowhere near where the existing dwellings are? What do we do then?
Make more envelopes.
Well, I assume at that point we would need to bring it back to you. I think the simpler solution, the preferable solution, would be to just lock them down to the existing locations. But
exactly, just to kind of put that in the suggestion that a while ago, Sherry, you mentioned, basically having a foot on base, so to speak, of the existing structures, of provided that the building envelopes are overlap with the existing structures.
Yeah, I mean, they could just draw the envelope around where the buildings are now, right?
That's the normal thing to do. Is you have to have an envelope around the buildings, and you might have an additional one or you might not. But I mean, for something like a barn, you don't want to say it absolutely has to be exactly in the same spot. And they probably need to think about and discuss whether they want to just limit the the dwellings. I mean, I remember St. Margaret's, but when I remembered it was much bigger, and I'm not sure which half of St. Margaret's this is, the one with the main house or the other one.
Do you, Sharon?
The main house.
Oh yeah, it's the main house.
Okay.
It's 5,500 square feet. It has to be the main house.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Well, Rose,
so I have a question. I have a question and a couple of comments, if I may. Where does the 500-foot setback come from?
Largely from the terrain. It falls short of the existing house. So that area between the main house and the road is a lot more visible than the rear of the property.
Well, I'm real familiar with the property and a couple of other easements that have been in place that have had setbacks. And I just do the math quickly. I mean, this 500 feet, it pretty much stops almost right in front of the house. it's got about 2,500 feet of road frontage. So if you do the math, that's 29 acres. That's 40% of their land. And that's no run-in shed, that's no gazebo for mountain views, that's nothing. And for those of you not familiar with the property, the back of that property line is a railroad track.
Right.
And it seems awfully excessive to me and very limiting.
A lot of times, Sharon, those setbacks used to have no new buildings greater than 500 square feet. When you say no new structures at all, full stop, you have to be careful because then you can't have a mailbox. But most of the time now, all this has been preempted by building envelopes, which just having something in the deed that has the word envelope can be prudent with the IRS. I would hate to have somebody challenged, by the service because we didn't, say to the landowner that they should at least study up on that.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to refer to one property that has the Albemarle easement on it that was done in 2017, had a 300-foot from the center of the road. And that was nothing. Nothing could be done. And it actually went to the front porch of the house. And so it's a big issue. It was just a huge, I'm surprised we finally sold it because it went through 5 different contracts and fell apart. I just hate to see you kind of, there's a compromise. You're getting conservation easement, you're getting setbacks, you're getting no division rights, you're getting limited buildings. The farm structures are limited. I get all that. It's a lot. 40% of their land is, unless you want to grow hay or something and put up a fence, there's nothing more you can do.
Well, as Sherry mentioned, we have done these setbacks with an exception for new structures of 500 square feet or less. If you all wanted to include that in the action, certainly do that.
Is this, Scott, is this because the entrance corridor, is it related to that?
The entrance corridor and the historic district.
And does it comport with restrictions on similar easements up and down the road?
Well, I don't have the terms of other easements on the same road. We have done, similar depths before on 231, I think it was. I get 22 and 231 mixed up in my head all the time. In the 250 to 500 foot range before. So, if you all feel that 500 is too much, we could cut it back to 250. We've certainly done that several times. Also, there's the possibility of doing that small structure exception.
Yeah, Sharon, I understand absolutely where you're coming from. And it does make sense that, we talk about that each property is unique also too. And that, the mention of a gazebo or I like your idea of 250 feet because that limits it to either a run-in shed, something that's a gazebo or a run-in shed, but not a building that would stand out and interfere with the scenic view from Louisa Road also.
Right. You mean the 500 square feet for the building, Jay?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Well, I think it's important that we be consistent and not sort of arbitrary and capricious with respect to, you look across the street, those houses are closer to the road than 500 feet. They wouldn't. So.
Some of them are, a lot of them are more visually obstructed because of the lights,
I
which
can
of course
see
could go away.
Back in the trees and stuff like that. You probably can't see them from the road, but I'm all for there being a buffer along the road, but I'd take Sharon's point too. I wish there were some history of what setbacks along entrance corridor roads and designated scenic roads and stuff like that. You see what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, they do tend to vary, partly because of the three-dimensional factor of what's the terrain like.
The lay of the land is certainly important, and I understand that as well.
I think it really depends on what the view shed is.
Right.
I remember I've looked at a number of easements that we have done where, you know, I knew that a certain house was 300 feet back, and it might as well have been almost on the road. I mean, the setback didn't, if we had a setback on that, it wasn't an important road, that one, but for some reason I knew it was 300 feet back, and I thought, oh, that's just not very much. So yeah. I actually have come to think that 250, 300 feet, unless it's all that's in the view shed because of the topography, let's say, doesn't actually accomplish anything.
Richie, did you want to add something?
I do. I mean, I understand and appreciate the discussion on the depth, and I think reducing it sounds appropriate. I do, in terms of Director Merrick's comments in regards to, I think it was her who commented that that no structures would be permitted, and so then you don't get mailboxes. Maybe that was Ms. Buttrick, or you don't have fences. You don't have some of those non-building structures that are customary with a residence and maybe with some rural lands, and either 250 or 500 feet prohibits all structures. I need clarification, because generally we do allow small scale structures on the properties, and it talks about fences, it talks about hunting stands, and I know you're not going to have a hunting stand out there, but you may have fences, you might have boardwalks, and I can't be real creative. You might have benches. I don't know what you put out there, but I want direction as to whether those would be permitted in that buffer zone. I think they should be, because otherwise it becomes difficult down the road to monitor and also to probably sell the property.
Well, if we do that 500 square
feet, is that sort of a standard run-in shed for horses? I'm trying to.
That's the number we've used before.
That's about 20. Yeah, that gives you 20 by 25.
I'm just wondering if they intended no new buildings as opposed to structures.
Yeah, I agree with you, Richie. Sometimes people say structures and what they mean is buildings.
Yeah, because I mean,
but I would say, especially to Sharon's point, you're going to want potentially in Albemarle County, which is mainly of livestock and largely equestrian forms of agriculture, you're going to want run-in sheds, and limiting to no structures makes no sense to me. I don't think it's wise, never mind good.
Right, and if anything, run-in sheds are kind of part of the scenic culture too.
Do we know how far how close that setback comes to the actual house? As
it's right up to it.
It's right up to it. But again, this is a setback for new structures. Doesn't affect that house.
Right. Well, that wasn't my question. I just want to know how close it is. Are you walking out the front door and it's right there?
Yeah,
pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, for example, if you wanted to add 1,000 square feet, which is permissible to run the main residence up to 6,500, you couldn't go out the front. You'd have to go out the back, or you'd be in that 500-foot line. And just to answer one of John's questions, the easement I referred to from 2017, that's 300 feet, no structures, is off 231 Gordonsville Road, and that's why it was such a problem. So 500 feet to me on Louisa 22 is, you know, and John can appreciate this, but, you know, I always kind of laugh or tongue in cheek when I think we're having these lovely green space easements and these view sheds that we're protecting. And we so hope that these drivers who are speeding way beyond the 45 mark speed, you know, are taking in all this greenery. You know, I just hate to think that nobody's really taking this in. They're just speeding on down the road. And meanwhile, the property owner has really tied their hands on how they can enjoy the property.
So far, I think what I've heard for potential changes to an approval motion might be one, to require that the two dwellings either be replaced in the same location or be placed in building envelopes surrounding their current locations, that the setback be reduced to 250 feet rather than 500, and that the setback area permit structures up to 500 square feet.
I like that.
What about 300 feet setback, not 250?
And how far is the house from the road?
About 500 feet.
501 feet.
500 feet.
How about we try this? Instead of putting a number on the setback itself, why don't we have the landowner draw their building envelope around the main house there? I presume it won't be more than, you know, an acre in size. I don't really know, and just have the setback go up to the edge of that building envelope, whatever it is.
Well, we don't know for sure that they're going to do envelopes, although, as Sherry points out, it's likely.
I like the 250 just for future owners. I saw 5 contracts fall apart over that. And it just makes you cry.
Yeah, and a fixed distance is easier for future monitoring.
Yeah, I guess I'm not comfortable with 250 and I won't support it.
I think it's too close also. I could see taking it to kind of where the circle of the house starts.
That looks like a loop in the driveway or something, Jay.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm a little nervous about the loop.
Scott, is there a reason why the owners proposed this setback?
I proposed it and they accepted it. Forgive me for unsharing, but I'm just going to pull up the GIS real quick and see if I can give us a decent number on where that driveway is. 66.
Like in the past also that we've had, when people have wanted to build in certain areas, they have to check back in with us for approval also. I'm trying not to make this more cumbersome on staff.
Yeah, it's that, I mean, having a requirement to check in for approval without having clear guidelines on what should or shouldn't be approved just leads to more awkwardness.
Yeah, it seems like the nice thing about envelopes or setbacks and restricted build areas is that then you don't have to worry about, blessing every structure that goes up. Now, if we have a building envelope, don't forget it's got to be bigger than an acre plus because there have to be barns and stuff in the other house. And, a lot of stuff has to go in there.
I'm not sure, and Sherry, your experience at VOF may be different. I think so far for the few easement authority easements we've had that talked about envelopes, most of them were only talking about the dwellings.
And not the agricultural structures.
Not the farm buildings.
Okay, right. I mean, be careful.
No, that's a good point, but I just think different places may be doing it differently. I'm not sure what is the latest demand from the IRS. That driveway is
everything in envelopes, full stop. I think.
Yeah.
They emphasize dwellings. Yes, indeed they do. And I have not seen them take up a case where the dwellings were limited, but not the barns. But I wouldn't want the case to be one of ours.
Right.
Richie, did you have something to add?
In terms of building envelopes, it's my understanding, finance department, I mean, they attribute 2 acres to maybe each dwelling. So there was some comment about an acre or maybe 2 acres around. I think locally we tax the dwellings and 2 acres as at fair market value and not at land use value. So 2 acre, a 2 acre envelope may be appropriate.
And we've had smaller and larger, and I don't know that the assessor's office really cares about these building envelopes. They only care about parcels, really. And you know, they have their own defined building site that from their own measurement for what's actually being used for the residential use. But I haven't seen them.
No, if I can just, when we talked about the 250 number and the possible 300 number, one thing that I just do for my visual brain is just imagine 300 feet is a football field. And I don't know, to me, that's a long way from end to end. And that's how I kind of measure on view shed and how it affects the passerby, or if you will.
I thought a football field was 1,000 yards.
No.
No.
Yards.
Thank goodness.
Gross, I don't want to play on the team plus you.
That's not a very good analogy for me, since I don't have any idea.
You know, remember about the 50-yard line, Rose?
Of course.
It's in the middle.
Okay.
I'm thinking of a polo field.
Yeah, those are at least 5 miles long, I'm sure.
They're all.
So here's the property. If you all can see the topo map, that driveway is a hair over 400 feet back, and the house is here at the top of the ridge. All of this area in here is mostly open and pretty visible.
Well, maybe you want 400 feet or else envelopes. But I do think you've got to put in that 500-foot exemption, or you're just going to get all kinds of problems when somebody puts up a gate.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, and I should have thought of that, but again, I was reactivating an old project and didn't think to take that into account.
All right, what about 400 or envelopes?
I think envelopes are appropriate.
So envelopes, are we saying that the envelopes would apply to any structure over 500 square feet? Is that how we're getting at it? That seems complicated to me. I'd almost like to keep those two things separate. Either the dwellings either locked at the same locations or in envelopes around those locations, and then the setback as a separate matter, being the area within which only structures are 500 square feet or less are permitted.
I think that's a good idea. I don't think you should combine them either. I think they should be separate.
Yeah, I would just note that they have been combined in many easements because of the IRS rulings.
Okay.
I think we have a viable solution, and we're early enough in the year that if for some reason this doesn't work for the donors, we can come back next month. But I think the envelopes / house locations and the 400-foot setback would be viable.
With a 500 square foot structure maximum.
Right.
In the setback.
In the setback.
Okay.
Who'd like to put that into a motion? Distill that, bullet point that in there.
So can I help just suggest that that the motion be that we approve the proposal with the amendments that one, the deed include building envelopes in the site of existing dwellings. 2, that there be a 400-foot setback, and within that 400-foot setback that buildings and structures less than or equal to 500 square feet are permitted.
So moved.
That's a first. John moves it. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Emmett. Is there discussion? Comfortable with as stated? All right, Richie, roll call.
Let's see, Mr. Fennell,
Aye.
Mr. Taylor's absent, Ms. Buttrick, Dr. Moses,
Aye.
Mr. Emmett,
Aye.
Mr. Moore,
Aye.
Ms. Emery,
Aye.
and Ms. Merrick.
Aye.
All right.
All right, so it passes as amended. Thank you.
All right, thank you all. Apologies for jumping from window to window here. All right. There we go. All right, so the second donation proposal is for the Hamilton property. And I believe, now I can't see the list.
Yes.
I believe Ms. Hamilton and Mr. Blaine are here to answer any questions you might have after we get into this.
Welcome.
30,
Mr. Blaine.
35 acres on Burnt Mill Road. And this is the property in red here. The reason I used this funny layout of the map was I wanted to show how much of this property drains very closely to the North Fork Ravenna River. So that its proximity to the river is a good part of this property's conservation value. So I wanted to make sure that was visible there. This is, again, an aerial view from just a month or two ago showing current state of the property. And the resources to be protected include, there are some small areas of critical slopes, including some that would be protected by the riparian buffer. While under the important stream valleys category, the streams on this property itself are marked as intermittent. They have sizable forest buffers and flow over not a very long distance at all into the North Fork Ravenna River, which is an important stream valley. There are just over 9 acres of wooded area that provide water quality benefits to the North Fork Ravenna River. The wooded areas in the property are rated very high and high by the Department of Forestry's Forest Conservation Value Project. And the portion of the property closest to the North Fork Ravenna falls into one of the 3 conservation focus areas established in the last comp plan update for biodiversity purposes. So these are the proposed terms. There are 2 dwellings on the site, each of which could be replaced or enlarged up to fixed limits. The landowner was particularly concerned about impacts on the front area of the property. So there's a 1,000-foot setback with that same 500 square foot exception we just talked about in the last item. Terms are standard for other kinds of structures on the property, except to say there are 2 existing corn cribs, the type that you're probably all familiar with the circular or cylindrical corn cribs with the screen sides and the metal roofs. Those should not be demolished.
They on a historic register, is that what?
They're not. This was one of the, there were several terms here that Ms. Hamilton wanted, items that she wanted to have protected. Also, there are these restrictions you can see here on certain forms of agricultural production that are more at the industrial or intense level. Let's see, the forestry uses, there will be no commercial timber harvest, no material harvest in the riparian buffer or on critical slopes. Restrictions on commercial level, not accessory level for home use, but commercial level solar power or wind power generation. And the marked riparian buffer area in brown will be required to stay. And I can bring up those restrictions in a separate document if you all need to see them, but it's essentially the same forest area protection buffers that we've done on other projects. So those are the landowners' proposed terms. I can try to answer any questions you have. And again, Ms. Hamilton and Mr. Blaine are here to help as well. So
if you have all the existing wooded area protected as a riparian buffer, isn't that the same thing as your, where's the one above about no commercial forestry?
Not sure to what degree we're splitting hairs here.
I mean, I'm just thinking of how to simplify this. Seems like there are a lot of well-intended, but you know, rather complicated terms here, and that those kind of, the idea of, you know, you're not going to cut down the existing woodland, that's sort of easier for you to monitor maybe than is X a critical slope.
I would agree that would be simpler. I'm just trying to accurately reflect what the donors had asked for. The commercial timber harvest outside of that buffer area only comes into play if sometime in the future there's commercial grade timber to be harvested. There isn't currently.
I have a question on the where it says the front structure setback also limits the water quality impacts on the existing pond. What does that mean?
The landowner was quite concerned about protecting this pond and avoiding water quality impacts on that. So given that there's this wouldn't permit any sizable structures, dwellings or other large structures that directly drain into that pond, there would be less impact there.
Is that a structure to the left of the pond, a dark spot?
This one here is that's the second dwelling. Main dwelling's back here. Second dwelling's here. So obviously that can stay and be enlarged up to the permitted size, but new structures would be limited to 500 square feet.
Scott, what was the answer to Sharon's question about that? I missed that. The dark spot to the left of the pond.
That's the smaller dwelling on the property.
Okay,
it's fine, the 1,600 square foot. Yeah.
This is what, 30 some acres?
37.
47, isn't it?
35.
35, yeah.
35. What precedent do we have of entertaining two dwellings on 35 acres?
We've got a few easement. I mean, these are existing. So yeah, typically we wouldn't want that if there were no dwellings or if there was only one. But in cases like this where they're already there, we typically just try to not let the number increase and minimize the size increases. There was another, I'm blanking on the name of it at the moment. There was another one over the very northern part of the county, just west of 29, on one of the upper tributaries of the North Fork Ravenna that was about this size and had two dwellings, and we allow those both. That one also had a sizable wooded buffer.
I mean, distinguishing the four division rights and just the water quality protection is pretty important in this easement.
I think water quality impacts are probably the biggest benefit of this particular easement.
Right.
Given the location and given the ability.
Even though this is
to
below our typical 40-acre guideline, those aspects are important to consider, and therefore it seems reasonable to accept this easement as proposed.
I mean, if the dwellings are there, they're there. I kind of feel like that's a whole different gig than whether we're permitting one per 40 acres if they're not there already. Right. I had a couple of questions about the individual terms when we get, if people are content to move this along.
Let's move this along.
Okay. I guess I would suggest that we simplify, combine the no timber harvest so that you have one term that is easy for you to monitor. And I think all the different ways of thinking about this, no critical slopes, a buffer, no commercial harvest, maintaining the forest. When you say existing woodland preserved as a riparian area, to me, that sounds like no commercial timbering on the whole forested land. But I would just ask that you clarify and simplify, but I applaud the effort and the impulse and the protection. I'm wondering about these corn cribs. Why no willful demolition of these corn cribs? Are they historic in some way?
The landowner may be able to speak to their actual age. We don't have any documentation that they are on any kind of register or
eligible?
You know,
I mean, why are we protecting them if they're new, let's say, or if they're middle distance in the past?
All I can say is this was one of the things that the landowner wanted to do. And perhaps she or Mr. Blaine can speak to the age. I tried to look them up and figure them out, and it was, you know, roughly mid 20th century. Is the best I could come up with.
You know, I just think we need to be careful that these easements are forever, and in 500 years, is it going to be important to preserve these corn cribs absent their being eligible for a historic register?
They'll be disintegrated in 500 years.
Well, I know, but it does get to be difficult. We've had trouble with when you have an old building that's, you know, undermined or falling in, and you have a provision like this, especially if it doesn't say without approval of grantee, the thing has to fall in completely before the landowner can push it over, and it becomes an eyesore, and everyone gets angry with the donee. And I'm just trying to guard against that kind of stuff.
Well, Chair, how large are the corn cribs?
I don't know. Is there a picture of them? I mean, where are these corn? Do we have even a visual on them?
Yeah, I'll get that in just a second here. Roughly 10 feet across, something like that. I mean, they're not large.
You don't have a picture of them.
I will have in a minute, but perhaps we could go on with the discussion while.
All right. My only other little question was, I get it about the CAFOs, but to me, that's the same thing as saying no feedlots, and it may be difficult to actually define unless you have a definition of what a feedlot is. I mean, is it a small paddock where you're throwing hay to the horses in the winter? CAFOs are easy. They have all kinds of, official definitions. And there's a lot of consensus that on a small property and in a watershed that they're not a blessing. So I'm sort of thinking maybe that covers it and makes it so that you're not in a position of making a subjective judgment.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
All right, I'm done. I'll shut up.
All right. Are we feeling comfortable with this now?
I would, with those couple of amendments to address those items, sure.
Okay.
So simplifying the forest protection terms, so it's just basically the one restriction, which would be the no material harvest in the buffer area. And then just focusing on
that's what you mean.
Right, sorry.
I do have a question on that because in the riparian buffer, there is permitted trails and fences and stream crossings and that sort of thing. So I want to be clear that if we simplify this, that we capture the donor's intention.
Yeah, and you'll probably want the ability for trails and such things as that. I would think. I mean,
typically permitted in these kind of buffer areas.
Yeah, exactly.
So in what I'm hearing is that we're putting on the scales 2 dwellings on 35 acres, and on the other side is protection of the riparian area and the river. Is that correct? And will that be expressed in our decision?
It's really a narrative area, except in our notes of conversation.
Oh, are they the corn cribs?
Those are the corn cribs.
Got it. All right, so who would like to put this together into a motion?
I nominate Sherry because I'm not clear on the amendments. If any.
Well, what I had was to clarify the forest protection down to no material harvest in the existing wooded area, and to simplify the restrictions on sort of industrial agriculture down to just talking about, rather than talking about CAFOs and feedlots, just talk about CAFOs because they're more clearly definable. Sherry, was that right?
Yeah, and I think you need to think about, I mean, I saw those corn cribs go by.
I can put them back up.
And I think you all should think about, I mean, sure, it's nice. They're nice. Yeah, I get it. They're nice. But these easements are forever. Do you really want to do that? And if so, are we using language that allows the grantee to approve a demolition if a tree falls on it, or if—
We could certainly modify if you want to add that to the motion, is modify the terms for that one to no willful demolition without holder approval.
I definitely think you must do that, or you're going to find yourself in a poster child problem at some point. My preference would be not to protect things that don't have any kind of historic, either designation or eligibility or something. But if we at least say without approval, then I think you're not in quite such a box.
I would agree.
I agree too, because it would be terrible if somebody misinterpreted this down the road and said that they had to replace or maintain them.
They'll be historic sometime.
If they last that long.
John, you're on mute.
I was just saying, they're not forever structures. They're metal wire. They're going to deteriorate and crumble at some point.
Rust never sleeps.
Yeah, and that's exactly my point, Jeep, is, they deteriorate, they're crumbled, they're leaning, the groundhogs have undermined them, and yet they have to stay there according to some Albemarle County authority that then becomes a poster child of everybody loves to hate,
Can the landowner or attorney enlighten us about those structures?
Hamilton, Mr. Blaine, would you guys like to chime in?
I'd have to defer to Ms. Hamilton on that particular. I do think this reflects her intent, but as to the attachment to the corn cribs, I just can't elaborate on that. I think Sherry's points are well taken, and I think in drafting the easement, we should make, you know, allowance for the natural decay of these structures. And I think the landowner should know that you can restrict your property beyond these easements too. If there's a particular, you know, feature that we want to preserve that is not appropriate for a conservation easement, there are other ways to do that. And I can counsel her on that.
That would be great. That help, folks?
Yep.
I have a quick question. Are we going to do building envelopes that are closely associated with the site of the current dwellings?
Seems it's...
Yeah, I was just going to make note that since we have the council on the call, that we at least highlight to him that if those envelopes are not done, that somebody's looked into it and made the judgment that that's what they want.
All right.
So we've got 3 modifications on forest protections, AFOs, and allowing holder approval of the demolition of the corn cribs. Is there anything else anybody wants to address?
If they come back with building envelopes, as part of the motion that that Jay can sign the deed with those, that we don't have to come back and look at them.
Sure, if staff thinks that makes sense.
All right.
Steve, do you have any other questions, just so we're clear on the drafting?
No, this is very helpful. Yeah, I think we've improved upon the terms to assist in the drafting. Thank you.
Great. All right, who would like to put this into a motion of words? Everyone leans back.
Should I list out what those changes were for somebody to respond to?
The forest protections, yes, please.
Forest protections being simplified to the existing wooded area, simplifying the restrictions on industrial agriculture down to CAFOs rather than feedlots, permitting holder approval of removal, demolition of the corn cribs, and noting that it is acceptable to the authority for staff to approve any building envelopes that are proposed during the drafting.
Okay, I'll make the motion if nobody else will.
Thank you, Ms. Buttrick. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Moses. Is there any further discussion? All right, nice work. Roll call, Richie.
Mr. Fennell.
Aye.
Ms. Buttrick.
Aye.
Dr. Moses.
Aye.
Mr. Emmett.
Aye.
Mr. Moore.
Aye.
Ms. Emery.
Aye.
And Ms. Merrick.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Excellent.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for coming.
Our thanks to the donor also.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Mrs.
Thank you
Hamilton.
very much. Thank you. Any new business? That's good to hear.
Wait, I do. So I was waiting for Scott. I didn't know if he was going to chime in.
No, I don't have anything.
All right.
I don't recall if I brought this up in March. I don't think I did, because we met before the Board of Supervisors. So what I'm working on is well, first, we'll know next week from the Board of Supervisors as to when we start meeting back in person. The goal is June, but that may change. So that's not written in stone. The second thing is, and so when that happens, we'll certainly provide everyone notice. Second thing is the General Assembly has changed the rules in terms of virtual meetings, that when we do return back in person, there will be some allowance for virtual meetings. I'm going to work on a policy. I think the only workable way for us to adopt a policy that we have to follow in regards to virtual meetings is if we use them just for special meetings. So if we have an issue that comes up that makes it in between regular meetings, that makes it difficult to meet in person, or if it's just more convenient to call it a virtual meeting, I'll work on a policy for you all to consider. If you think there are other circumstances where a virtual meeting would be helpful, kind of feel free to share those with me, and that'll be something that we have to consider. Target date for adopting that policy is August, because the law comes into effect as of September 1. It also, the change in the policy, actually, it just kind of echoes current law, but we don't have a policy on remote electronic participation by individual members, and that's for personal matters or business that might take you out of the area. The board does not have to accept a remote participation policy, but it is allowed to do so. So I'm going to prepare a draft policy on that for your consideration. That will allow individual members to participate electronically and remotely for up to 25% of the meetings held during a year. So in this case, it generally would be 3. It's for personal reasons, and those have to be disclosed and voted on. It could also be for medical or disability reasons that don't really have to be disclosed. And there's no limit as to how many meetings you can participate in remotely if there's a medical or disability reason. And that applies to taking care of family members also. So that's a policy that will be, that I'll draft for your consideration. So I just wanted to alert everyone. And when I get a draft, I'll be happy to share it with the members.
Richie, I would strongly encourage the supervisors to permit that. Many of us are interpreting attending any gathering extremely narrowly because of the uncertainties over the virus. And I'm involved with 2 other organizations that have said in-person meetings are off until there's an agreement that the level of risk or level of immunization is high enough to keep the rates of infection very low in a community. But there are too many unknowns. And it would be very reassuring to allow remote participation by those of us who have caution.
And so that may fit into a policy that we draft. But if I'm not a medical doctor, obviously. If they're still concerned about returning to in-person meetings, we can continue to operate under the continuity of government ordinance for a certain period of time. And if that's a wish of individual members, I would encourage you to reach out to the Board of Supervisors, whether it's the whole board or a member or the supervisor from your magisterial district, to let them know your concerns, because that's something they're going to take up next week. And I've seen the projections, so I can certainly understand if they say it's too soon to lift that ordinance and to demand that meetings go back in person. But I don't know how that'll happen. So I do encourage you to reach out to your supervisor.
Yeah, I think it'll be great if we can be back in person again at some point, but I really agree with Chip that as long as the virus is a problem, it would be nice if we can, have the option of doing virtual meetings. I think COVID's also shown us that in many instances, they're just more convenient as well. I do sit on a board where it's a statewide thing, so they do partial participation remotely. And it's always a disaster, I have to say. We spend the whole time wondering if the person's still there, having them call back in again after they've been cut off. And so the partial thing can be kind of a bore, but the remote option, Richie, if possible, I think it's a good thing to allow us to make that election if we want to. I think we kind of learned that it's possible.
I would agree with Sherry on that, because I also have a virtual meeting where you can do either one. You can get on Zoom or be there, and it's just not very satisfactory. It's very confusing. It's just not a satisfactory solution to have both. It's difficult. Well, I don't know that I think that we lose a whole lot by doing it on Zoom.
The problem is the FOIA statute, the General Assembly was not so generous.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. But so much choice. Yeah.
But I mean, I will take y'all's comments and I'll look at that in terms of the policy I draft for your consideration. It's a separate matter is whether the Board of Supervisors decides to continue under the continuity of government ordinance. That's what we're operating under right now. That allows us to do all virtual meetings. And they have an option to continue under that. And that's why I encourage you to reach out to the supervisors.
I'll do that tomorrow morning.
Yeah, that's great. I think that'd be good.
I'll append my MD, but the real point is not now. It's in 3 months when there's a resurgence of the virus and there may be a delay in the reactivation of the special provisions.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to raise my hand for even down the road, that if someone is on the road, like I am frequently, I haven't found the mix to be disastrous. I just spent the last 2 months having to do this in a university. There were about 80 people involved. Half of them were in one room and the other half for calling in from the airplane, we were flying a lot. So we're actually having conversations in the air. It worked. So I just pitched that. I think it's not something to go to the mat on. I hear all the other arguments, which are better than mine, but I would like to have that ability to call in, even though most of you are in person.
At the moment, we've got the technical setup and the staffing to do those so-called hybrid meetings for the board and for the planning commission. But I don't know if we're going to get that level of technical and staffing support for the, frankly, dozens of committees and authorities that we also have to staff, because it does add some complexity to be able to do public meetings that are partly in person and partly online.
What could be better FOIA than an entirely recorded Zoom call? You don't miss anything.
No. Yeah, that is true.
Mr. Chairman, do you want some old business questions?
Sure.
Are we done with new business?
Are we done with the new? What happened with the used car lot?
Oh, yes, please, the used car lot.
Oh, zoning has been, well, that was not the old business I expected. Zoning has been working with them to get everything moved out. They delayed for quite some time and promised action and did very little. But Jolene Boone, who's in zoning enforcement, has been, I don't have the most up-to-date details, but she has been working on that site and getting everything moved off of there. So I can check in with her and let you all know for next month.
Scott, I can report because I did the zoning violation also.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
So we did, the county did bring a warrant in debt against the Plugers, and they were given some time to complete the cleanup, and they failed to do that. So it went to judgment. It went to trial, and then the court found in favor of the county. So it went to judgment. I don't know that I know as of it had 30 days. So I know as of last month that code compliance was supposed to go out and take a look at the property and then bring, if it hadn't been in compliance, then the plan was to bring another violation and another violation and a show cause contempt proceeding against the Plugers. I don't know the status of that. I can tell you I have not received what's called a civil penalty package and a request to do a show cause. I haven't received that yet. I hope that's the optimist in me says that they've complied, but I don't have an answer at this point in time.
This was pursued via zoning. Does that adequately protect the easement terms as well?
I think it does in this case. Zoning is not going to enforce something that's only a term of an easement. We're going to have to do those enforcements if they occur. Knock wood, they won't on our own. But in this case, the same activity was a violation in both worlds. And obviously zoning enforcement is much better staffed and prepared for this kind of direct enforcement.
But therefore, if the zoning terms are met and the judgment terms are met, then we need not do anything further.
I don't think so, no, because if those cars are gone, then our objection is over.
Well, in terms of cars being gone, being in the rural areas, he will be allowed to have 2 inoperable vehicles. They will have to be covered. So I think the zoning does cover us in that extent, because I think if we're claiming that 2 inoperable vehicles on the project that he's going to claim are hobby cars or a violation of the conservation easement, that might be a tougher sell. So at least zoning enforcement has some objective standards.
But is anybody living in those vehicles?
Living in the vehicles? Not that I'm aware. They're shells, I think, aren't they?
It was feeble humor here.
Oh.
Something is lost remotely.
Raccoon dwelling.
I think any of us would quite. There was a tragically decayed XK12 out there that I don't think would be a comfortable living space.
It's hard to find rental property.
All right, moving on. Any other old business?
One other point, the roundabout construction on 22, did that get completed, and was it done according to what we agreed on should be done?
I have not been out there yet. I can go out and take a look.
You mean, is that the Riggery? The Riggery
Yeah,
property?
the Riggery.
Yeah.
That's on 20. Yeah.
At 20,
it's 20, not 22.
It has not been completed, no.
Yeah, I asked the question because I drove through there 6 weeks or so ago, and there was a lot of disruption and also a lot of mud. Although it did look to a cursory glance that they had done pretty good stream protection, but we have limited monitoring resources, but that's one that the loop ought to be closed on.
Well, I'm monitoring it all the time going to the airport. So, because I live on Pantop, so.
Okay.
My recollection was that landowner was pretty insistent. I thought the landowner was, but I don't know if the landowner resides there full time or not. But I thought the landowner was was pretty strict about what he was going to allow VDOT to do. But I think this goes to Dr. Moses' point. If he's not there, then it doesn't help that much.
To my eye, that little sliver that we had to pass a judgment on has been protected to the extent that was agreed upon. I don't see any encroachment any further onto the property than was agreed to.
Your wealth of information.
But I agree with the other side opposite that. It's they've been tearing things up, and I'm not sure they have erosion control there that we might expect.
That was the VOF. That's the VOF side.
Yeah.
The opposite side from the portion that we were working on, so I think it was on the Columbini property, if I remember right. So the southwest side, there would be a lot of disruption because they were putting in some constructed stormwater management features down there.
Yep.
On the low side of it, running toward the river.
That's right.
The river's very close.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not very far.
All right. Any old business? Any other old business? All right. Well, got some work done today. Thank you, folks.
Thank you all for your input. It was very helpful and I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for your time.
Thanks, Jay.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Richie.
Thank you.
Guys, this time next month.
Nope.
Are we